We've got about half an hour to talk about and ask questions about those two presentations. I think we're aiming really, if possible, to find general principles and things you think you've learned. My favourite question that I'm asked by my chairman is not how wonderful am I, how much money do we make, or anything like that, but what did we get wrong in projects that we learned most from. So I'm going to give Paul a moment to think about that. Tim, I'm going to give you no time talking. If there was one thing that was your biggest lesson in the projects that you're describing, what's the thing you think you learned most from?
We get everything wrong because we're researchers and that's what we're supposed to do.
All right. What did you occasionally get right? No, I mean, what are the characteristics of good learning experiences for you, though, as researchers? What do you learn most from?
I think you have to be open as you do it, and not believe that you have the solution, but that you have the problem in mind and that you keep working on it, so that the things that are going wrong are actually your investigation. And I think we get it most wrong when we think that somehow it's the technology that's going to solve it. That we think we've found the particular platform or whatever will work, and when we get to that point, we all remind ourselves that we shouldn't be doing that. But it sort of creeps in that direction.
Sometimes it does. Getting something wrong all the time is kind of what these development processes, these kind of collaborative processes are all about. It's not wrong, is it? It's developmental. But in terms of the way you structure things, what have you learnt most from? Did you go down any blind alleys when you were first doing this?
Yeah, I think there's always a danger, particularly when you spend so much time and invest so much effort in trying to test the boundaries of these technologies and find new things to do, that you forget where your audiences are at and kind of push yourself too far ahead, because actually these are fantastic devices for engaging with audiences and finding new people to work with. But if you race too far ahead, you're going to struggle to hold them with you. And one of the things we learned very early on in a kind of drama practice was that you needed people in rooms working with young people. The technology was a fantastic asset and added something new to it, but it wasn't going to replace the fact that drama is about people in spaces making work together in a very social kind of way. And so not to kind of unlearn the things you know about your practice already, but to find new ways of extending it and deepening it with these technologies.
So it's about digitising your skills and digitising your practice and digitising your approach rather than starting from digital technologies. It's sort of same sort of thing to some degree. Okay, and boundaries. I mean, all that work defies boundaries to a certain degree. You know, they're the people. I've described them in articles on these previously. We're all the people formerly known as the audience increasingly. We're kind of part of things in a way that we've once been dumb receivers. Does that create challenges when working with artists? Does it create challenges when working with actors in your case, or with, I mean, the BBC, generally speaking, from my experience, it creates enormous challenges. And if so, why?
Well, I think there's a whole traditional line about the relationship between people, the difference in power between them, and particularly if you're in the public sector, that you're the people with the expertise and you're trying to help other people who are your audience. And it's quite hard to let go of that. But the exciting thing about the arts and culture is that they're full of really interesting examples of trying that out, and the living newspaper example that Paul introduced us to. Often the things that you hold on to aren't new at all, but they're failed experiments that took place in 1933, and they're interesting to come back to them. I mean, as Paul was talking about manifestos, I tweeted that one of my colleagues in the room would be really interested about that, because we've done manifesto-based projects before. So there's often, deep in the root of the experiments of the past, new things that you can bring back. They're always ones which try to reconceive the power relationships between people, I think. The technology is just enabling them to happen in a way they couldn't work before.
So have you found, either of you, both of you, found sort of inherently more participatory art forms, more sort of, I'm not going to say low art, because I know that's a false dichotomy, but you know, art forms which are already capable of being more participatory, are they more productive for your kind of work? it sort of seems to me that people out of theatre quite often have an easier trajectory towards digital media than people, for instance, out of television do, because of that whole power relationship thing. Does it it's in the DNA, you know, your Joan Littlewood thing, everything through that, Unity Theatre and right through it, and Brecht and everything. I mean, is it just in the DNA of good theatre practitioners to be able to do participatory work?
I think so. I mean, that's one of the things that we learnt was that, in a sense, our skills and experience in educational drama and participatory theatre made us very well placed to kind of develop this kind of practice. I remember looking a couple of years ago at Mark Prensky, who wrote, you know, coined the phrase digital natives, and he kind of identified 10 hallmarks of what a digital native did in terms of their learning. And you know, some of them were things like they wanted active learning experiences rather than passive. They wanted fantasy rather than reality. They wanted connected social experiences, not standalone. And all of those qualities, I looked at them, I thought, well, that just sounds like my theatre and drama practice. I couldn't really see any huge difference from the way I approached my practice as a drama educator from the way those processes were embedded in these technologies. And that, in a sense, is, we talked earlier about testing propositions within this fund. That's essentially the core proposition of what C&T does with these technologies, is test those relationships.
And how, Tim, how do you relate to the people forming them as the audience? You know, there's a sort of, there is one model of developing technology projects where, you know, it's a bit like the power relationship of making television programs. I make a thing, and then I send it out into the outside world where it is tested on the audience, a bit like things are tested on rabbits. And then eventually just maybe it changes a bit. And there's another model, which is a kind of rolling, constant development. It looks to me like you work in that world, and quite often when you work with broadcasters, for instance, they don't. What happens in the middle? How do you make it function, and what would you recommend people who are doing this for the first time? What model should they take?
Well, of course, for recorded music and radio, there's probably no greater place where the obsession with market testing is so prominent. And it to pick up, answer your question, but to pick up some of the other things, it seems to me that it's in the avant-garde of arts that there are so many interesting things about what texts could and should be like. Broadcasters have an obsession with standards, professional standards or technical standards, and I think it's quite hard to sustain that with this new technology. And Paul noted that don't worry if it doesn't look good, because that's the sort of material that kids work with all the time, and they're interested in other forms of communication that come through them. And then it's those traditions of democratic participation and of community arts and of community culture, and something about the distinctiveness of people and the things that they bring together in common. I think those are really exciting opportunities, and for people who've worked for a long time in arts and culture, for whom that's been really important. Identity, sense of place perhaps, sense of activating communities to be able to say things that often remain silent. All these new technologies enable these possibilities, while at the same time solve some of the funding problems. They create opportunities for new business models, and it's the business models of the traditional media that are under threat.
So when you're in that conversation, I'm coming out to you as soon as anybody's got something to put your hand up about. When you're in that conversation with Nitin Sawhney, I'm sure it wasn't quite as easy as you presented it, but I mean, what was worrying about it for the artist?
Well, it was my colleague Andrew Dubber who worked on the Nitin Sawhney project, so I'm relying on second-hand information to some extent, but I think always working with artists, we've had problems. There's always misunderstandings. You often work through their agents before you start working with them, and the first conversation is, I wasn't expecting this. You mean that's going to happen? And what about my artist? You're going to put that on the internet. It's not finished. So there's a whole series of concerns that artists often have, because we have a model where the finished product is the most important thing, and that has to have a level of polish, partly because the people who are paying money to come and see it will consider that to be important, and it's quite hard to let go of that. And yet artists have always valued the process of development and exploring their ideas as they go along. I think it's in that, when we talk about the music industry, we often say the things that you used to make a living out of, you must now use to promote you. And the things that you used to give away for free, that used to be the promotions for the way that you earned a living, now have to be the things that you make your living out of. It's quite hard to do such a radical change, but it's a simple philosophy. I think it's a very good place to start.
Okay, great. Questions? Any questions or contributions from the floor? There we go. Yes, please.
Hello, can you hear me? I'm Ruth Catlow, I'm from Furtherfield, and I wondered if Paul, if you could talk a little bit more. You were saying about just talk a little bit more about what you mean about the way you're thinking in new ways about IP licensing scalability. I'm interested as to what IP means, in where the IP is in the work that you're doing.
Well, I suppose really it's recognising that for us, product in kind of traditional theatre terms wasn't a kind of production with set and costumes and actors that would be touring around for a finite period of time and happening on the stage. So that, in a sense, the ideas which might be embodied in the website, or it might be embodied in some other media form, were the strength to the core creativity that we were trying to make happen. Actually, the living newspaper is something that we've been working on for many years, and the project itself has taken on various guises and various forms as technologies have moved along. This is just the latest version of it. And I assume in the future we'll find another version of it. But actually, the core of the ideas, the core of the kind of covert network, the 5 rules, has been there for 9-10 years. And it's just a case of being able to hang on to where the real value of what we're doing lies, and then being able to kind of reinvest those ideas in a new form, in a new way, so that it makes sense for audiences in new ways. We quite often say it's kind of a bit like when you have your kind of music player on your kind of Microsoft Music player, you create a new skin for it. It's in a sense the kind of the core of what it does is the same, but the way you make it look will be customised and changed for yourself. And so it allows us that, for example, the Living Newspaper project can happen in 3 places, or it can happen in 25 places simultaneously. It doesn't automatically mean that we have to have 7 times more actors than you do. We just need to have the kind of support services and that scale and ready to be able to have an impact in those kinds of ways. The idea is still strong and is constructed to be able to deliver in those kinds of ways without us kind of having to create huge kind of infrastructures around it to support it.
So, Paul, is it the case that it's the kind of format and the methodology where the real value lies for you? And would a living newspaper, would those guys making the newspapers ever think that they want to copyright and prevent other people from looking at it? Seems anathema to the idea.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real complex area. It's still one that was struggling to kind of get our heads around, because in a sense, we can't copyright the idea of living newspapers, because they've been around for a very long time. They're not ours to copyright. But actually, the model of the network, the characters and the relationships and the narratives that we can see today is that you can tell stories with these characters, which kind of create learning experiences for them. So, for example, we did a project about climate change and rising sea levels using Tom Petty where it turns out Guy was an environmental activist and was kidnapped. And that allowed young people to kind of explore those issues through his story over a number of video clips on that website. And we can kind of own that as a narrative, right? But in some ways, this is nothing hugely radical, because in a way that's just a play. It's just a different way of holding our ideas.
Jamie Jackson from the Hereford Photography Festival. Hi. It's really just to pick up on a point about a possible artist's role in this process. And obviously there's a massive model of artists who are involved in process of making, and that's not an engaged process necessarily, but there's a lot of artists who do work as artists, as idea makers, and perhaps in terms of master planning in the public realm, or just the conceptual sort of history of making artwork in the visual arts is a really important key, I think, for this partnership that an artist can bring to it. It's not a question, it's kind of just a statement.
Do you broadly agree with that?
Yeah.
I'll just pick it up with another concrete example that I didn't talk about. When we did Just Like Jazz, there were several, we were giving effectively the ability to take photographs out, and there were professional photographers there who work in jazz. And we thought they'd be furious, but actually they brought us all their photographs and let us load it up. What we promised is to put low-res versions on. And one of the photographers we worked with there, William Ellis, now is the official photographer of Jazz FM and has all his work on Jazz FM and earns some money from that process as well. But much more importantly, his work is much more widely known by a group of people who like it and appreciate it. And he tells me he's now selling far more very traditional prints that he used to try and work on before. And somehow, when he shifted his attention, what he was trying to do before suddenly started to work for itself in a way that it didn't. So, to me, unless we have the creative ideas at the very heart of this, and these technologies do have a democratic impulse in that if you learn enough about them or you have a collaborator who understands them, I think the artist can be at the centre, the creative can be at the centre of these things in a way that they haven't been able to do before because they're so institutionalised.
Yeah, Mark Prensky, the digital natives kind of guy, in his kind of 10 hallmarks, his last hallmark was that children and young people see technology as friend, teachers see technology as foe. That's the kind of challenge in classrooms, is that most of the time teachers are swearing at these things, whereas young people just embrace it. And I think in our experience, where we have our animateurs working in these schools all over the country, some people surrender to those possibilities more easily than others. And I think that's the key thing really, is just being prepared to be open to those things and just see the possibilities within it, and then just kind of surrender to that and bring your practice into the centre of that work.
Okay, time for one or two more. Okay, there we go.
Hello, my name is Olga Gribben, Arts Council England. Just moving on from Tim's point, is this working? No?
Barely all. Lift the level, please.
No? Working now?
I can hear you.
Okay, you can hear me.
Let's
Tim,
go with old technology.
I'm interested in the point that you raised about funding, the funding of work, which has an increasing global profile, I suppose. And I just wondered whether Paul might talk a little bit about his business model.
Yeah, very timely. I mean, I think it kind of constantly is changing, really. The key point for us when we started to develop the network about 4 or 5 years ago was to try and build sustainable relationships with schools. And so we decided that the best way to do that was through a kind of, if you like, a very grand subscription basis with those schools, so that they kind of sign up to be members of the network for a year at a time. And actually, we kind of really encourage schools to work with us for a 3-4 year period at a time. But actually, in terms of their constraints, they can obviously only kind of approve funding on a year-by-year basis in terms of their school budgets. But we kind of encourage people to think in the long term, and so that they have access to not just an individual project, but an access to the whole kind of portfolio of projects like the Living Newspaper. And so it becomes a much more kind of holistic experience for them. And then that gives us, we found that gave us a much, it's not cheap for schools who want to work with us, but it gave us a strength and security in terms of how we built those partnerships and we built those relationships. And in a way that kind of echoes the comment that was made by the gentleman over there earlier about how you undertake research and development whilst being in a kind of marketplace, really. And I think for us, just that the model for us is about honesty and transparency with those schools. So that we say, look, our work is about testing the boundaries. It is about being innovative. We are trying to do things differently. So we can't guarantee all the time that every single one of our projects is going to be 100% hitting the mark on day one when it's launched. But if you're prepared to take those risks and come with us, we're the kind of partners that you might want to work with. If you don't, then we're not the right people for you. And you know, we do turn schools away, or schools decide not to work with us because they don't want to think and work around those kind of shared values. We're now looking more, we've kind of experimented with it, but individually licensing projects. So is it possible to maybe kind of clusters of schools just to do a short-term living newspaper project with less kind of hands-on support by C&T? But kind of finding those variables within the model is kind of, you know, kind of a slowly growing organic process, I think, really.
Great, thank you. Time for one more, if anybody's got a burning point they'd like to make. Here we go.
Can I just quickly ask Tim?
You just hold for the mic a second, if you wouldn't mind, please. Thank you.
Say your name properly.
My name's Kate Chapman. I'm from Theatre Writing Partnership in Nottingham. I was just interested in how you were talking about the dissemination of the results of your work more broadly to arts and cultural organisations. I just wondered how we might access that. I was particularly interested in the NIST and Sawney project and just knowing a bit more about the detail of that.
Well, you can go directly and see the Aftershock site. It's still there.
Okay.
So we tend to preserve and archive what we do.
Yeah.
We try and report on it, and we blog everything that we do, both as individuals and as a research centre. Interactivecultures.org is where you have to visit if you want to find out about us and what we're doing. You can also hear all our conference presentations there as well, while we talk about obscure things that we're looking at. So it's supposed to mesh together into something that a coherence reveals itself from the parts. It's a bit like the internet.
So those who want to go and hear Tim talk about obscure things on the interweb. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much to Tim and to Paul for their contributions. Thank you very much to you. Thank you also to those of you who are tweeting. I'm going to close the session. Becky, I don't know where you are, Becky Cowan, who says she's glad to hear so much conversation about engaging audiences with content and artistic quality, and with technology being the enabler, not the starting point. And that's the best summary I could have done, and I didn't even have to do it. So there we go.